We feel like, as we look out in our country, we can sense with the election, with other types of violence we see around us, we can sense divisions. Whether those are racial divisions, whether those are political divisions, or whether those are economic divisions. It is my opinion that in America, the deepest division is neither racial nor political, but the deepest division is economic. We're divided on economic lines. In fact, there's this book called that I want to get, and it talks a lot about West Virginia. It's called Hillbilly Elegy. And it talks about, it's by a guy named J.D. Vance, and he talks about how the lower class in Appalachia basically has been completely ignored, and that's one of the reasons Donald Trump, people like him, because he pays attention to that particular lower social economic class, the class that's ignored. Now, you got your inner city poor that people talk about, but there's millions of poor, rural poor outside of the inner cities, poor that we see driving from here to Charleston, on the edges, out in those areas, poor that we see, poor that many of you probably deal with in your day-to-day life, poor here in West Virginia. I grew up in Mississippi. Mississippi or West Virginia are always 49th and 50th in the worst categories, whatever it may be, poverty, whatever it is. So in some places I moved up one category, in some places I moved down one category. But I grew up with extreme poverty in Mississippi. Okay, no one cares, because these people aren't in the middle of New York City. These people aren't in the middle of Memphis. They're living in trailers out in the middle of nowhere with a little running water. The deepest division, I believe, and one of the reasons Donald Trump has gained so much traction in this election is because of the economic divisions in this country. Okay? In this country. And unfortunately, this is true in the church as well. This is true in the church as well. The churches tend to divide among economic lines. Okay? You have your poorer churches, your smaller churches with poorer people, and then you have your hip, younger churches that have more wealthy people. I don't know if wealthy is the exact term I would use. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is, a lot of the large churches, a lot of the big churches appeal to upper middle class people. A lot of the biggest ones do. Okay? Why is that? Why don't it appeal to the lower middle class or the lower class? Why don't they appeal to the guy who's making minimum wage at McDonald's? Why is he the guy that doesn't show up at church? And the guy who's a lawyer or a professional does? Why does the church not appeal to the poor like it ought to? Okay? And if you study the history of the church is filled, especially the early church, with thousands of poor coming to her. The poor wanted to be there. And it wasn't because there was a free handout. It wasn't the reason. Because they were loved and they were cared for and they were given dignity and they were provided for. Okay? So today I want to talk about the ministry of mercy and how we as a church can minister to the poor. And I'll tell you how this is going to go here. This morning I'm going to do your sword drill. Remember the sword drill? Find this verse, find that verse. I'm going to do a sword drill, okay? We're going to work our way through the Bible looking at texts that talk about the poor. And then I'm going to lay out some principles for caring and mercy ministry. And then tonight, if you come back, tonight at 5 o'clock, we'll talk about some of the practical things. When do you stop giving? How do you know what to give? How do you know who to give to? Okay, so we'll talk about some of the practical things. If there's some questions, especially for members of Christ Church who plan on coming back tonight, or you can email me as well. Doesn't matter. If there's a question in the sermon today, you're like, well, what about this, Pastor Peter? Just write it down, jot it down someplace, and send me an email or bring it tonight. And we'll talk about it, okay? Because we won't be able to cover all the things today. Okay? You might say, well, I thought we were going to talk about deacons. Okay? Well, we are talking about deacons. Okay? And what you got to understand is deacons function in a church where the ministry to the weak and the downcast and the widowless and the fathers is a priority. That's when they're going to minister well. That's when they're going to have the resources they need to do their job. If we don't care about the poor, it doesn't matter if we have 100 deacons. It doesn't matter. It won't make any difference at all. Okay? So what I'm trying to do today is lay this foundation for mercy ministry so you'll understand what the deacons are doing and what you should be doing. Because the ministry of the poor Ministry of mercy is not for the deacons. We're not hiring guys today to do your job for you. Okay? That's not what we're doing. All right? And if you think that's the case, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Okay? There you go. All right. So, care for the poor, care for the weak, care for the fatherless, widows, orphans, care for the downcast has always been a priority for God's people. Okay? Always. All right? And let's just look at some text. We're going to walk through these. Try not to go too fast here. If you want to just jot them down and look at them later, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to start in Deuteronomy 15. Some of these I will paraphrase, some of these I will read. Deuteronomy 15 is talking about the day or the end of the 7 years. Every 7 years, at the end of every 7 years, a person, an Israelite, had to be released from their debt. Okay? Had to be released from their debt. So if you loaned them something, okay, if you gave them money and they did not pay that back by the end of those 7 years, then they were released from that debt. Okay? They're released from the debt. All right. Now, one of the temptations there might be, okay, let's say you're 5 years in, 5.5 years into the 7 years, and somebody comes to you and they need money. What's your temptation going to be? Well, one, not to give it to them, right? Not to give it to them. Why? Because it's basically like a gift. In a year and a half, it's all going to be up, and I'm going to have to basically write it off. I think it's going to be temptation. Or the temptation would be to jack up the interest, right? Well, you know what? If you come to me the first year, it'd be 5% interest, but only a year and a half, so now it's going to be 25% interest. Okay? Well, the Lord specifically forbids that in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy. Because the poor were the ones who needed money, not the rich. The rich generally weren't the ones who needed money, obviously. Okay? And there's things, our culture's a little different. Okay? We're not talking about business capital here. Okay? We're talking people who can't pay their bills, who can't provide for their families, and they need money. Okay? And his point is, so I'm just going to read, start in verse 7 of Hebrews chapter 15. I'm sorry, Deuteronomy chapter 15. Hebrews only has 13 chapters. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 7. If there's among you a poor man of your brethren within any of your gates in your land, which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother. But you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. Beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand. And your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it becomes sin among you. You shall surely give to him, and your heart should not be grieved when you give to him. Cheerfully give. Because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works and all which you put your hand to. For the poor will never cease from the land. Okay, remember Jesus says this very similar phrase when the woman breaks the perfume over his feet. He said, you will always have the poor with you. The poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor, and to your needy in your land. And notice the second person pronoun there. Your brother, your poor, your needy. These are your people. Okay? Your people. All right, so Deuteronomy 15, verses 7 through 11. Deuteronomy 24 has already been read. You can look back at that. I'll refer to that later on. I'm going to skip over here to Psalm 41, verse 1. So I'm just laying a foundation here for, and there's a lot more verses than this. I mean, there's hundreds of verses in the Old Testament about the poor, the needy, the fatherless, the widow, those people like that. Hundreds. Okay, this isn't some little, I'm not plucking a few verses out that just happen to be there. Okay. Psalm 41, verse 1. Blessed is he who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in time of trouble. The Lord will preserve him and keep him alive, and he will be blessed on the earth. Blessed is he who considers the poor, thinks about it, meditates, focuses on those who are poor. Psalm 112. This is the righteous man. Psalm 112 is like Psalm 128. It's a psalm about the righteous man, the holy man, the man who loves God, the man who fears God's commandments and walks in his ways. And what does that man do? Okay, verses 4 and verse 9. This man, unto the upright there arises light in the darkness. He is gracious and full of compassion and righteous. A good man deals graciously and he lends. Verse 5. He will guide his affairs with discretion. Verse 9. The good man, the righteous man, he is dispersed abroad and he is given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Okay, so one sign throughout the Old Testament, one sign of a righteous man is that he gives to the poor. He's not greedy. He's not stingy. He's not always weighing it in the balance, trying to figure out what's best for him. Okay? Proverbs. It's interesting. There are a lot of verses in Proverbs about the poor. I was kind of stunned by this as I read through it. Just look at a couple of these. Proverbs 14, verse 20 and 21. The poor man is hated even by his neighbor, but the rich has many friends. Okay, we all know this, right? Lots of friends come around when you get money, right? Somebody wins the lottery, all of a sudden all these folks show up. You know, you get a big inheritance. Oh, I didn't know you were my cousin. Well, way down the line, somewhere I am, I'm sure. Okay? The rich man has many friends. Now notice verse 21 though. He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he. We tend to despise our poor neighbors. It's fun. It's always ironic to me how many Christians make fun of the people who shop at Walmart. I always think this is funny. Okay? We're all about compassion and mercy, but somebody comes into Walmart not looking all that great, kind of ragtag, maybe a little overweight or whatever, tend to mock them, don't we? We do that as Christians. And that's shameful. Frankly, that's shameful. I've heard Christians talk about how they'd rather shop at Target. I'm not against Target. We shop at Target too. I know Christians who said they would rather shop at Target than Walmart because of the crowd, because of the people there. Okay? Now, if you just like Target over Walmart, hey, great, more power to you. Okay? But if you don't like the crowd there, there's a problem. There's a problem with that. Okay? Does not please the Lord. Verse 31 of the same chapter, Proverbs 14. He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors him has mercy on the needy. Proverbs 21, verse 26. And this is more about how verse 25 and 26 go together. The desire of the lazy man kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. He covets greedily all day long. But the righteous gives and does not spare. And we're going to talk about this later on. But the reason we earn is so we might give. That's the reason we earn. We earn so we might give. We don't earn so we might keep. Or we might buy. We earn so we might give. Okay? Proverbs 22:22. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. What's that from? The Lord, if you go plundering the poor, guess what? The Lord is going to come plunder you. And he's going to plunder your soul. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. We don't want to be there. And finally, Proverbs 31:20. Think about Proverbs 31, woman. We talk about her a lot. What a wonderful woman she is. And notice what she does in verse 20. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. A righteous woman extends her hands to the poor. She's not just concerned about her household. Yes, her household is clothed in scarlet. But that's not all she's concerned about. She's concerned about the poor outside of her household. The lady down the street who can barely make it. Whose yard clearly needs help. Who needs help getting groceries. She's concerned about the poor and the needy. And she reaches out her hands to them. All right, a couple more here. Jeremiah 22. This is very interesting to me. Jeremiah 22, verse 11. Of course, the prophets, when we think about what caused Israel to fall. Okay, you know the story of Israel. David, Solomon split into two kingdoms. Southern kingdom, or northern kingdom fell around 720. And the southern kingdom fell around 586. What caused the southern kingdom to fall? And we can talk about a lot of things. There's idol worship, there's sexual immorality. But there is most definitely oppression of the poor. It comes up in Isaiah. It comes up in Jeremiah. It comes up in Amos. It comes up over and over and over again. Sexual immorality, idol worship, and oppression of the poor, they go together. Okay? And that's why we live the country we live in. That's the place. That's why we're going downhill economically. Okay? All right. So Jeremiah 22, starting verse 11. For thus says the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, who went from this place. He shall not return here anymore, but he shall die in the place where they have led him captive, and shall see this land no more. So basically, Shallum, Josiah's son, is going to be cast out and not come back into Israel. Why? Okay. Verse 13. Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by injustice, who uses his neighbor's service without wages, and gives him nothing for his work, who says, I will build myself a wide house with spacious chambers, and cut out windows for it, paneling it with cedar and painting it with vermilion. Shall you reign because you clothed yourself in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. Talking about Josiah. He judged the cause of the poor and the needy. Then it was well with him. Was not this knowing me? Okay, now notice here, the Lord equates knowledge of him with caring for the poor and needy. Josiah knew me. And how do I know that? Because he did not panel his house with cedar. He cared about the poor and the needy. And you, Shallum, you don't. And therefore I'm going to cast you out. Okay? Yet, verse 17, yet your eyes and your heart are for nothing but covetousness, for shedding innocent blood and practicing oppression and violence. All right? Practice oppression and violence. Okay, a couple more. Amos is filled with this, by the way. That's why it's one of the favorite books of social justice warriors, if I can use that term. Amos is. But there are a lot of there's good stuff in there. We don't need to give it up to those guys, okay? People who are kind of off the deep end and sort of liberal in their way they approach economics and things like that. Amos is clear. Oppression of the poor leads to God's curse on you. And this is what Amos teaches. And Amos is saying to Israel, because you have oppressed the poor, therefore I'm going to judge you. And I'll just tell you the verses. You can look at them later. Amos 2, verses 6 through 8. Amos 4, verse 1. Okay, I'll read Amos 4:1 because it's talking about the ladies in Amos 4:1, which is kind of interesting. Not in glowing terms either, by the way. Hear this, you cows of Bashan, you who are on the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, bring us wine, let us drink. Okay? So what we have here in Amos 4:1 is women oppressing the poor. Women oppressing the poor. Right? And then Amos 5, verses 10 through 12, and Amos 8, verses 4 through 6. So you can look at all of those. And I could have pulled more from other Old Testament passages. All right, shifting gears to the New Testament. You think about the ministry of Jesus Christ. He was constantly caring for the poor and the needy, whether it was a widow who were... Notice how many widows show up in the Gospels. How many widows? He raises the widow's daughter, son. He cares for the widows. Okay, Jesus does. Why is that? Well, because they're weak and they're helpless. In that society, widows had nothing, especially if their family did not care for them. We see this in 1 Timothy chapter 5. If the family did not care for the widows, then the widows were outcast. They were poor. They were not taken care of. Okay, there was no government that would come in and care for them. All right? So you can read through the life of Jesus. Jesus in Luke 4 says he came to preach good news to the poor. And this is a quote from Isaiah 61. He came to preach good news to the poor. Mark 7. Okay, now Mark 7, you might remember this story. The Pharisees are finding ways not to give money to their parents, okay, but to give money to, they're saying it's Corban. Okay, now it's all about the tradition of men, and that's the main point. But notice here that Jesus is concerned because there's sons and daughters out there who are not providing for their parents and are using pious reasons not to. I'm going to give my money to the church. Therefore, I don't have to care for mom and dad. Okay? So it's not just about the traditions of men in Mark 7. It's also about caring for the weak. Okay? It's also about caring for the weak. Of course, Luke 10, the Good Samaritan story. All right, it's probably the one that pops in your head most quickly when you think about caring for this. And we tend to sanitize this up. But imagine you're coming along and there's somebody lying. What would you do, okay, if you saw somebody lying on the side of the road, naked, bloody, and beaten? Okay? Well, you know what you should do. But the real question is, would we do that? Because it's messy. You got to go, bandage him up, get all your clothes dirty, get down in the dust. Okay? You got to get him on your donkey. Your trip's messed up. You know, I had to be someplace. I had to be somewhere. You know? And here I'm late now. You know? This guy made me late. How dare him? You know? And then he took him to the hotel and said, hey, listen, here's my credit card. Anything that guy needs, run up the tab. Whatever he needs. Medical care, food, clothing. You run up the tab, and when I'll come back through, I'll pay it. Okay? And there's a reason the Good Samaritan has been one of those stories throughout the history of the church for God's people. Okay? And then you go to Acts 2, Acts 4. Read you a couple of these. Of course, there's a lot more in the story of Jesus. I'm just kind of giving you a flyby here. Acts 2, starting in verse 42. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, breaking the bread and prayers. Then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together, and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided them among all as anyone had need. They sold their stuff to give to the poor. Now, think about it for a minute. Now, we'll give. We'll give to the poor. I mean, a lot of us will. If we see a need, we might provide. Would you sell your car? And, sell your car and get a cheaper car so you can give somebody $5,000 extra bucks? That's what they were doing. Acts chapter 4, same idea. You can read that for yourself in Acts 4. Acts 20, verse 35. This is interesting. Acts 20 is Paul's farewell address to the Ephesian elders. And notice what he says here in verse 33 to 35. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. And covetousness lies at the bottom of most failures to show mercy. Let's just be honest. We're greedy. That's why we don't show mercy. And there's other reasons. Sometimes laziness. Okay? Sometimes pride. But usually it's just greed. Paul says, I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. Yes, you yourselves know that these hands have provided for my necessities and for those who are with me. Paul was a tent maker. So he didn't take any money from these churches. Okay? Now why? Verse 35. I have shown you this in every way. But I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. That's his point. His point is the reason I'm a tent maker is so I don't put a burden on you. So you will learn not to put a burden on others and will care for those who are weak. And you remember the words of the Lord Jesus that he said it is more blessed to give than to receive. Okay. Acts 20 verse 35. Okay, just a couple more here. Ephesians 4:28. This is one of my favorite ones. I quoted this from the pulpit before. Ephesians 4:28. Let him who stole steal no longer. Don't steal. But work with your hands. Why? So you may have something to give him who has need. Okay? We work with our hands. We labor. We do our vocation. We do our job. Why? So we can provide for those who are less fortunate. That's the biblical reason for vocation. Okay? And other ones, you can look at 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19, which talks about the requirements of the wealthy to be rich in good works. Okay? Hebrews 13:3, where it says, remember the prisoners. And James 1:27, which says, fatherless, orphans and widows. This is true religion, that we care for orphans and widows. And then James 2, verses 1 through 5, tells you not to show partiality to the rich, but to make sure you care for the poor. James 2, 1 through 5. Okay? And we could do a lot more. You probably can think of some in your own heart, in your own mind, passages or examples of caring for the poor. The one that always pops in my head is David and Mephibosheth. Remember, Mephibosheth was one of Saul's grandsons. He was related to Saul somehow. And he was living out in a place called Lo-Debar. And Lo-Debar, Lo means no in Hebrew, and Debar means place. So he was living in no place. Okay, Mephibosheth was out there hiding from David because David had wiped out Saul's party, Saul's family. Well, one day, knock, 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 there comes one of David's representatives knocking on Mephibosheth's door. And what does Mephibosheth think? So he found me. I was out here in no place and he finally found me. But that's not what happens, is it? David invites Mephibosheth in. David cares for Mephibosheth. David says, I will restore land to you. Okay? I will let you eat and drink at the king's table. You will be like a king's son. What a great sign of mercy that is. Okay? And throughout the history of the church has loved to do this. Okay? And I think there's several examples here throughout the church. John Chrysostom was a church father who preached, and he preached in Constantinople. And Constantinople was known for its wealth, extreme wealth. Okay, and it wasn't like today where if you didn't like what the pastor said, you moved down the street. Okay, there was one pastor, and it was Chrysostom, and that's where everybody came. And so the empress, I think her name was Theodosius, or I can't remember her name. It started with THO or something. But the empress would be sitting up here in the front row. Okay, the empress and all her entourage would be up there. And Chrysostom said, you guys need to melt down all the gold in the castle, or in wherever they live, and you need to give it to the poor. You're being greedy. To the empress sitting right there in the middle of the sermon. You're being greedy. And that's how he preached. That's how he preached. He got cast out a couple times for it. Empresses don't get real excited when you call them out in public. But he did right. He told them, well, there's people starving and you're eating off of gold plates. Explain that to me. Okay, is what he said. Explain that to me. Do you really care about your people? Okay. And of course, we go to the reformers. Luther and Calvin died with almost nothing to their name. Okay, almost nothing. In fact, it said if Luther had not married Katie, he would have given away everything. Because Katie kept them semi-fed. Okay, that was his wife. Kept them semi-fed. But Luther just gave stuff away. People come, sure, come on in. Here, you need this? Calvin was known for selling his books to provide for poor refugees that came into town. Spurgeon started, if you read about Spurgeon started all these ministries in London. Orphanages and hospitals, places to care for the poor. And those are just examples, kind of the major examples. Caring for the poor is a primary mandate for the people of God. Okay? It is something we must do if we are going to love each other, if we're going to love our community, be a witness to the community, and we're going to glorify Jesus. It is not something we can set aside. And that's one of the reasons we want deacons to help facilitate this and get this going. Okay? The entire body, we all must be ministers of mercy. All of us, and no exception. Okay, so here in the last part of the sermon, I want to lay out a few of these principles, some of these things that we need to remember, and I'll try to work through these at a pretty good clip here. Okay. First, we need to remember there can be no mercy ministry without a proper understanding of the mercy of Christ to us. Okay? This is where mercy ministry begins. It doesn't begin with a plan. It doesn't begin with a list. It doesn't begin with deacons. It begins with understanding that we are weak. We are poor. The last words Martin Luther ever spoke that we know of, okay, are, we are all beggars, this is true. We are all beggars. There are no exceptions in this room. There's no exceptions out there. Before the Lord, we are all beggars. And when you see that dirty man down on High Street or wherever you live, remember, that is you before the Lord, before Jesus saved you. Okay? You are a dirty beggar just like everybody else. And God, in His mercy, delivers you. And He saves you. And He rescues you. Not because you're good looking, because you aren't. Not because you're smart. You might be. You might be good looking too. But He saved you because He loved you. And He wanted to show us mercy. So the foundation for mercy ministry here at our church and the other churches where you guys go is the mercy of Jesus Christ. None of us deserve anything we have. Okay? And this helps us when we relate to others, because we tend to look at others and go, well, I'm not sure that guy deserves it. I'm not sure that guy deserves that, a meal at McDonald's. It's probably some low-down, boozy bum. I'm not sure he deserves it. Well, there might be reasons not to give it. I don't know. But one of the reasons is that he doesn't deserve it. That's not a good reason. Yeah. None of us deserve it. None of us deserve it. Okay? So it begins with the mercy of Christ shown to us. And if we don't understand that, then all the plans and the programs are a waste. It's just a waste. Okay. All right, second thing. We need to remember that physical needs matter. Physical needs matter. Whether or not someone has food or clothing matters. If someone has lost a job, it matters. If someone can't make their payments, it matters. We tend to spiritualize these things and be like, okay, what really matters is their soul. I don't need to give them money because their soul is important. Well, their soul is important. It does matter, obviously. Okay? We're not pitting one against the other. Okay? And there's some churches that tend to do that. Like, okay, giving to the poor is more important than preaching the gospel. Well, no, it's not. Okay? But giving to the poor is important. And physical needs do matter. Okay? They do matter. We see this all throughout the Bible. I mean, God cares for His people physically. He doesn't just say, I'm going to save your soul and now you're going to starve. And that's not what He says. He says, I'm going to give you your daily bread. I'm going to provide for your needs. Okay? Third, we must understand that legitimate physical needs will always exist within our circles. And that goes back to Deuteronomy 15:11. There will always be legitimate physical needs. We'll never reach a place where there's not any. Okay? And kind of this utopian idea that sometime, someday, we'll all have enough money and it'll all be fine and there won't be any poor. Well, that's not what Jesus says. He says you will always have the poor with you. Okay? And by that, He doesn't mean somebody's being lazy. He means a legitimate poor person. Okay? A legitimate poor person. Right? And I think a lot of the problem here is we tend to think in sort of a one way, sort of a box when we think about physical needs. But branch out for a little bit. Okay? Look around you. There are a lot of physical needs out there. From people needing help mowing their grass, people needing help shopping, new mothers needing help taking care of little ones they have running around the house. Okay? There are always physical needs, and there always will be. Okay? So we're not going to reach a place as a church or wherever your church is at, here or anywhere else, where all of a sudden there aren't any. All right, that was number 3. legitimate. I'll talk about more of this tonight, more about that specific point there, about some of the things we can do to address physical needs. Number 4, we need to work hard so we might give generously and freely to others. Okay, this is the 4th point. Work hard so we might give. We don't work hard so we might hoard. We don't work hard so we might buy. We work hard so we might give. That is how the scriptures teach. That is what the scriptures teach. Mercy ministry is impossible without stuff. It's impossible without money. In fact, it's interesting. One of the things I'm going to encourage you with later is this little phrase. I found this interesting. This is from a form for ordaining deacons, and it says this: brothers and sisters, make sure that the deacons have sufficient means to fulfill their ministry. Be good stewards of all that the Lord has entrusted to you. Why? So you can give. The point of being a good steward is not so you can have more for yourself. That is not the point. Okay? Good stewardship is so you can serve and so you can give. So yes, we want to work hard, and yes, we want to earn, but we earn so we might give. Okay? All right. Number 5, we need to be a church that welcomes the needy. Okay? We need to be a church that welcomes the needy. I was talking to a friend of mine, Charles Humphrey, down in Bristol, Virginia, and he has a prison ministry. And he's in there, and of course you got all sorts of drug addicts, and it's not high security, but just all sorts of guys in there who are, well, they're in prison. Okay? They're not great guys. They're shady characters, right? But he goes in there, and a couple times a week he preaches the gospel to them, and men get saved. And he says to himself, are we ready, talking about his church, are we ready to bring into our congregation a former meth addict? You know how meth is all over our state. Huge problem. Are we ready to bring into our church a former meth addict? Are we ready to bring into our church those who have been sexually abused? Are we ready to bring into our church those who are barely making it, living in very poor living conditions? Do we want those people around? Okay, and this is why I use the Walmart illustration. Okay? But I think for a lot of us, it bothers us. People like that. They irritate us. We don't want to be around them. We don't want to shake their hand. Well, we will never do effective mercy ministry if that's how we approach people. If we look at somebody like, you're a problem and I don't want you in here, then we will not minister to people. Now, obviously, we have to do it with wisdom. We'll talk about some of that tonight. But my point is attitude. Attitude towards those people. Attitude towards the former drug addicts. Attitude towards the former drugs. Attitude towards those people. And if our attitude is, you're a loser and we don't want you in here, then we'll never be effective. I mean, that's plain. How do you react when someone looks at you with disdain? How do you react? Well, you don't want anything to do with them. Well, if we as a church walk into Walmart and see all these poor folks lumping around, in clothes that barely fit, their kids look like they bought everything off, the real secondhand store, okay? The bad store, everything's kind of hanging on. If we disdain those people, we will never be able to minister to them. Okay? So we want an attitude that says we want those people here. We want to minister to them. We love them. We want to know Jesus. We want to provide for them. Okay? All right, number 6. We must learn to show mercy in our daily living. All right, I'll try to move this along here. We must learn to show mercy in our daily living. Okay? How can you, and it's a simple question, how can you in your day-to-day life show mercy to those around you? And I'll give you kind of a silly illustration. So the other day we're at the library, and our library has parking meters. Okay, so I drove up, and I got out, got my coins, boom, 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 put my hour in or whatever. And I looked over here, and here's a car, and it's got 1 minute left. Look around. I'm like, all right. So I put a couple quarters in there. Now, is that a big deal? Well, no, it's not a big deal. And you might say, that's kind of, who cares, Peter? It's just like 50 cents, whatever. Well, why not 50 cents for that guy? I think a parking ticket's at least $4, maybe 10. I don't remember, right? But the point is, I did it for me. Because I need to be more compassionate. I don't need to sit there and go, well, that loser, you should have put more money in. Okay? And then you go, okay, great. I'll put a couple quarters in. Save the guy. And then true enough, the guy came back, and those quarters had run out already. The guy came back right when we came out. And mine had run out too, by the way, which was kind of funny. Okay, so no one had put any in mine. So anyway, I came out and those guys were like, oh my goodness, we were so late and they didn't get a fine or whatever. I don't know if the parking guy was around. Those parking guys downtown are tough though, man. They got that little cart and they drive around and look for them. My point is, look day to day, how can you show mercy? Like Ben was saying the other day, he was at Walmart and there was this lady trying to get this grill in the back of her car. And Ben goes over there and helps her get the grill in the back of the car. Great, that's what you want to do. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. Okay? And just how can you help people? If you develop this sort of mercy attitude in your day-to-day living, then you'll start being merciful to people. Okay? You'll start being merciful to people. All right, a couple more things here. Is that number 6? Number 7, basically the same thing. We need to have more of an eye for the outward community. It is not enough that we love each other, though that is where we start. Galatians 6:10 says, let's do good to all men, but especially the household of faith. So you start with the household of faith, but notice it says, let us do good to all men. It doesn't exclude those people out there. And that tends to be our temptation. Why? Because we're comfortable with each other. Yeah, I'd much rather give money to somebody here than give money to somebody out there because I know you and I trust you. That guy, I don't know that person. I don't know if I can trust that person. Okay? So we need to have an eye to the outward community. You guys do a great job caring for one another in here. Okay, there's lots of ways you exercise mercy toward each other. Think about bringing meals. Think about work days. Think about helping people out when they're out of town. There's lots of ways you show mercy. Okay, lots of ways you show mercy. Make sure you show mercy outside as well. Okay. All right, and the final thing I would say is, the question is not, does it hurt you? The question is, often we ask ourselves, I don't know the best way to say this, but often we ask ourselves, can I afford this? Can I afford this? Can I afford to do this? Okay. In other words, what you're asking is, will this hurt me? Will this be painful for me? Well, if that's your first question, you've already lost. I'm just going to tell you, you've already lost the game at that point. If your first question is this going to hurt me? Then you've already lost. The question really is, does that person need it and can I provide it? Not does it hurt me to provide it? So for all of us, and this has been a little longer sermon for those of you who aren't always around, always here, a little longer than typical, but for all of us, I want us to have an eye to mercy ministry. Okay? We've done a good job here at Christ Church building up our ministry of the Word. Okay? We read the Scriptures, we study the Scriptures, we memorize the Scriptures. We meet together and we talk about the Bible. But if we're going to have impact in Morgantown, if we're going to have impact in Fairmont, Clarksburg, wherever you guys live at, if we're going to have impact there, we've got to be able to minister to people this way. Okay? And that really comes down to understanding Jesus, His mercy to us, having an attitude towards the people around us that is one of love and not condemnation. If we do that, then our deacons will be busy. And they will have lots of stuff to do. And they will have the means necessary to do the things that God has called them to do. If not, we'll just be running in sand. Just be slow, we won't get much done. So that's why I'm preaching to the whole congregation, not just preaching about deacons. Because we all have to be behind this, not just the deacons. And we all have to have this attitude of showing mercy to those around us. So I encourage you with this. Again, if you have questions about this, you can come tonight. We'll talk about some of the more specifics, or you can email me if you would like. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we do thank you for the mercy shown to us in Jesus Christ. We thank you that you did not leave us as beggars, but you have made us sons and daughters who come into your house. We're made princes and princesses. We're crowned with glory and honor. We're given all good things. You give us our daily bread and much more besides. And yet, Lord, we are hard-hearted way too often. We are stingy with the littlest things sometimes, whether it be a couple of quarters or something, a glass of water. I ask, Father, that you would help our hearts to be open wide to those around us. Help us not to be always evaluating, weighing in the scales how much pain this is going to cause us. But help us to find ways to minister to those around us in word and in deed. Help us to love one another so the world might see how we love one another. Help us to provide for one another so the world might see how we provide for one another. And help us to minister to those around us in our neighborhoods, our communities, at our work who need help. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.